Welcome, everybody, to the Pulse on Redbirds podcast, live at WLCA Studios. Once again, I'm your host, Colin Pullman, and I'm here to talk about anything and everything St. Louis Cardinals baseball. And, of course, today I have a very special guest joining me here today. We have Jake Wood. He is the writer and host of Viva El Birdos Podcast, as well as their website. You can also check out Rambling Redbirds as well on Spotify as well. Jake, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me. It's a true pleasure to be here, and honestly, I'm really ecstatic to be able to be back here and Lewis and Clark and doing something positive for the sports side of things, because as I know that sports wasn't a main focus whenever I was going here, but I'm just happy to be here and be a part of this.
Yeah, I'm happy you're here as well, and we're just going to get right into it.
Let's do it.
How's that? So, St. Louis Cardinals are prepping up for probably a pretty dormant winter as far as offseason transactions go, but there are a lot of different, exciting things going on as well. It's not just, we're not going to make any moves and all that. There have been a couple of things from the organizational standpoint of things. One of their key emphasis this year is in their reset is they want to address the player performance and really build that back up to where it was back in the day. So recently they added 3 new different guys on that side of things. Larry Day, he's now the director of player development coming from the Cleveland Guardians. We also have Carl,
Cochan.
Cochan,
the way I've heard it, pronounced.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Carl Cochan, he is the director of performance coming from the Dodgers. He was their strength and conditioning coordinator. And then we have Matt Pierpont, who is the director of pitching, and he was with the Seattle Mariners. So, Jake, can you give me some of your thoughts on those guys, and were those good additions that the Cardinals made?
Yeah, so they were really smart additions to what the Cardinals are trying to do. Whenever let's take a step back further first and start with Chaim Bloom, right? And his, taking over for John Mozeliak after the 2025 season. One of the things that is so prevalent around Chaim Bloom is just his personality, and a lot of people say he's one of the best guys in baseball, and he likes to surround himself with really good people. And his first addition he made at the beginning of this offseason with Rob Cerfolio coming over from Cleveland, and then Rob also brought in Larry Day, who worked with him, and
Right.
Rob was very complimentary of him as well, and saying that he's just one of the best genuine dudes that he's known, and Rob specifically likes to surround himself also with just good people, and so good people who care about each other, because ultimately at the end of the day they view it as a people business, baseball in general. When you talk about Matt Pierpont, you look at the Seattle Mariners, their pitching staff, and he's been a big part of that. Whenever Pierpont went on Twitter and kind of announced the whole he's moving to St. Louis, underneath it you could kind of scroll through it, and Bryce Miller, one of their starters, said, "Thanks, Mr. Coach, we'll miss you." So obviously he had heavy influence on some of their really high-end pitching that Seattle brings. And you look down the list, Carl Cochan, who you've referenced as well. I was listening to Bernie Miklas, who, shout out Bernie, who does a fantastic job.
Yes, absolutely.
And
one of the legends.
Legends in St. Louis, absolutely. Talked about on one of his previous, his most recent videos, talking about this, that Cochan has 5 World Series rings between San Francisco and LA, and he's taking over so they've always had player performance and development, but they were always kind of the same thing. And what the Cardinals and what Chaim Bloom is doing is now splitting them into 2 separate pools, but they also will talk to each other and report back to each other,
Nobody's going to get left in the
Right.
dark. It's all
Yes.
connected.
And so what Coach Chan is taking over is that player performance side. So he's going to be working, specifically when you think about athletes and nutritional, dietary things, you think about weightlifting and exercise and strength and conditioning, and then also, mobility, flexibility, making sure their bodies stay in, tip-top shape. When you think about the Dodgers and the Giants and all of the winning that they've done over the last decade plus, it's not just about the amount of money that they spent on, players, but it's also about the investment they made in the infrastructure and making sure that those players were in top peak performance. And not that the Cardinals weren't necessarily doing it, but to that same vein, it's taking it a step further than what they were with the addition of Coach Chan. So a lot of really smart, high IQ guys being brought into the organization, and it should give Cardinals fans a lot of optimism because there's a lot of smart people who are going to do a lot of smart things coming into the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you, man. I mean, that all goes back to Chaim Bloom, right? And thankfully we hired him last year so he could kind of get an idea of where the organization was at, and obviously has a tremendous resume with the Tampa Bay Rays and the Boston Red Sox, and just being able to bring in quality guys like you mentioned really jazzes up the team and makes things cohesive with each other. So I know you mentioned about some of the with Gary Coach Chan, his work. Is that going to be a direct correlation as well with the minor leagues? Because I know we have also made a few additions at the minor league level as far as the coaching and player performance as well.
Yeah, so it's kind of an overarching thing. He'll be working directly with like the major league staff and what they do, but also overseeing what like the minor leagues and what they're doing and how they're preparing players and getting them, in their top peak physical form as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. So we also have, we mentioned about a couple of the connections with the Guardians and the Mariners. As far as the major league coaching side goes, this is new news, but we have a new hitting coach, Brant Brown with the Seattle Mariners. And also we're bringing back John Jay, obviously former player, outfielder, fan favorite guy. So can you speak a little bit on those guys and kind of what the impact those guys are going to make at the major league level?
Yeah. So I can, we'll talk about John Jay first because he's a little bit more known amongst Cardinals circles. What John Jay was always most known for was his, defensive ability as well as his base running, and his defense in the outfield. And that's kind of going to be his role, is to work with the players on those types of, subtle, distinct. What's the word I'm looking for?
Characteristics,
the details. That's the word. How can I not remember the word details?
the little things in the game.
Exactly. The fundamentals.
Impact.
Yes, exactly. And so, when you think about like a Jordan Walker, right? And he had very little outfield instruction in his time in the minor leagues, and we're all becoming more and more aware of that as time goes on. He will be a vital resource for Jordan Walker to take that next step forward in the outfield. When you think about what Paul Goldschmidt brought and his impact to the Cardinals and the way that the base running, whenever he came in and kind of worked with guys in spring training.
Base running,
yes,
defense.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Before he came.
But he was a player on the field. And
right.
so like you were getting a coach and a player at the same time, and he worked with other guys on that. But now that Goldschmidt has now since moving on, you bring in John Jay to kind of take over that role, as well as we saw Willie McGee decide at almost 70 years old to kind of take a step back and doesn't necessarily want to be uniformed in the dugout traveling with the team, and that kind of, because when you think about what most fans I don't think realize is just the grind that it is for major league coaches on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's a full commitment.
Yes, and so at almost 70 years old, it's more than understandable for him to want to take a step back and kind of a special advisor to the president of baseball operations role. He can take that step back and kind of travel to some of the minor league sites kind of at his own leisure or his own pleasure, and kind of check in with guys, drop those subtle little tips and hints and things, and work on those little details. See, there's that keyword details details again and hit on that, and just work with guys in that traditional kind of roving coach instructor role that isn't too demanding on him, but still allows him to be involved in the process. So,
well, I think it's also great too that a lot of, we bring in a lot of these former players, alumni to come back, and they're willing to give back to the younger generation of the game. So, do you think there are any more guys like that? Because I know in the minor leagues, Ryan Ludwig is an instructor, Jason Isringhausen is as well. They will continue to do so. Obviously, the secret weapon, Jose Oquendo, God bless him, all the incredible work that he does with those young guys down there. Do you think there will be any other former Cardinals that we will bring in? Because I know we had Matt Holliday for a little bit, but then he decided to back out, which is completely understandable.
Yeah.
But do you think we'll make any more of those additions in the future?
Yeah, the Cardinals have already said after this recent announcement of hires that they're now looking their next step in this process, this evolutionary process, is they're going to add a catching coordinator, a roving outfield instructor, and then one or two more just kind of roving instructor type. Now, to your question, would it be former Cardinals? I'm not sure that it will necessarily be former Cardinals, but I would expect them to have some form of playing experience in their background as in that role. So
sure,
it may not necessarily be former Cardinals, but should be.
Yeah, because I know probably in the dream scenario for our Cardinals fans, I know I've certainly dreamt of it. Probably ideally, how you would set it up is you have Yadier Molina as your manager, you have Albert Pujols as your hitting coach, and then you have Adam Wainwright as your pitching coach. Obviously, we're not living in a dream world, but there is some credibility as far as Yadi goes. I know on 105.7 The Point this week, they had an interview with his brother, Benji Molina.
It was on 101. Sorry.
Oh, it was on
TMA. Yep.
My bad.
You're good.
Same studios and all that.
Yeah.
So, anyways, on 101, they were interviewing Benji, and basically, he was kind of giving some insight as far as kind of what Yadi's thinking right now, and obviously his goal is to be a manager in the big leagues, and Benji has already stated that he's received several offers from other teams to do that. Do you think the Cardinals are finally going to cut bait and let him do that? Because I know he has been in a special advisory role for Mozeliak, but he hasn't really had that, dream kind of job with them and role. So do you think they're finally going to cut bait and kind of let him do what he wants to do?
You never say never in the future, but at this current juncture, what we know about the DeWitt family is they don't like to eat money on things. They don't like to get rid of contracts. And so I have every expectation that Oliver Marmol will be the manager in 2025. Now, there is a reason why the contract was extended such a short amount of time is because of Chaim Bloom taking over after 2025. Typically, whenever you see regime changes, you also will encounter some form of coaching change as well, because they want to bring in their own guys to kind of do things. Now, I will say that 2025 would be another season, basically a job evaluation year, right? Not only for him, but for maybe 29 other teams that might, also know of Ollie Marmol and what he might be able to do or bring to their organization as well. And so it's all encompassing this new change and new direction that the Cardinals are going in, and everyone's kind of being evaluated all at once. And for the Yadier Molina aspect specifically, and Benji did mention this, that it wasn't something he was going to do until after his son was graduated from high school, which will be after this season or next season. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but it's not something that's going to factor into the 2025 situation. 2026, maybe. 2027 would appear wholly more likely in my mind if that were the case. And yeah, absolutely. Like you've seen Yadier Molina, he's coaching right now in the Dominican Winter League. He's coached for the World Baseball, or managed for the World Baseball Classic. He's adding this experience. And of course, Cardinal fans would be over the moon about it. But for me personally, I have some reservation to the idea of making Yadier Molina, Albert Pujols, Adam Wainwright a coach, only because, and not because I don't like them, but because, think about what happened with Mike Matheny and now with Ollie Marmol, and at certain times fans really didn't like Tony La Russa or Mike Schilt, right? But now that they're gone, like we have, revisionist history and we always loved him. No, that's not always the case. And I would be worried that if Yachty doesn't live up to the expectations that fans would put on him and then lose some of that luster, we see that no one is really invincible to fan criticism and, losing that luster and that shine. And so I would be hesitant to put him in that spot with the Cardinals, only because knowing how much he's adored and loved and what he did for the organization, I would hate for it to not go well.
Yeah, if he doesn't get a World Series, I mean, it's pretty much bust.
And then fans turn on him and it goes south. And so I, for me personally, I would be hesitant to that idea. Now, I mean, he could come in and do a great job, and I have no doubts about that, but I would be worried, what would happen if it went wrong, Ollie Marmol is a different situation. Everyone believes that he's Mo's puppet, which is asinine in my opinion. Everyone believes that Ollie Marmol doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't do a good job in his role, which I disagree with. You look at expected numbers and outcomes this year, he overperformed expected outcomes. One of the true measures of a manager is bullpen usage, and the Cardinals had a top 3 bullpen in the entire league, and so. When you look at things that Ollie Marmol can control, he can't go up there and swing a bat for every player that goes up to the
exactly
right. He can't throw every pitch for every pitcher. He can't do that, but he can decide what players are in what positions, when, where, and how. Right, and he can kind of try to influence that, but he doesn't play the game for the players, and so the only thing he can do is put the best player in the best position to succeed at any given moment. And so for me, I don't think he does a bad job. I don't think he's an elite manager, but I also don't think that he's the direct reason why the last 2 seasons you've seen the Cardinals take step backs in performance.
No, I would agree with that as well. He's a proven professional, and he goes about his business pretty intently, and he's gonna give it to you straight no matter what. So,
and that does tend to rub fans the wrong way sometimes, is that he's very cut and dry and very direct about things sometimes. And some people have even suggested maybe he needs like some media literacy training or something like that. And It's like, I mean,
that's a first for me that I'm hearing that.
It may be just more fan speculation, but just the fact that he comes off the wrong way, and some people kind of take him as more of like arrogant, and but I don't ever get that. Like I get that he's just very straight,
he's
direct.
Just pretty blunt.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't really see or hear of players going out of their way to say, I hate playing for Ollie, I don't like Ollie.
I would just I mean, if you have that idea, I mean, I would say pretty much everybody in the clubhouse, I would say he's a player's coach, and they all appreciate the work that he does and like playing under him. So
yeah, fully agree.
So as far as kind of wrapping up some of these new additions in the organization, do you anticipate us to add any more individuals, or
to the coaching staff,
to what the player performance, all that? Do you anticipate us making any more of those additions?
Yeah. So
if so, do you have any ideas of who those individuals may be?
I don't have any ideas on who that might be. They tend to keep those things pretty quiet. Like I had mentioned before, they are looking at more, coordinators for the minor leagues. From what I read recently, the Cardinals are pretty set on their major league staff. So what they have is what they're going to go into 2025 with. I almost said 24. Going into 2025 with. But yeah, there should be a few more additions as far as like minor league not coordinators, but instructors and kind of in that level as well. So
gotcha. Well, we'll see how it all plays out. I think so far they've done a pretty good job of the guys that they have added so far. So kudos to Chaim Bloom, and let's hope that he continues to flourish in those aspects of things. So moving on, the winter meetings is fast approaching this coming weekend. The Cardinals have a number of questions that they need to ask. Obviously, they're in a big reset, and there's been rumors around us potentially trading off big name players like Nolan Arenado, like Ryan Helsley, Steven Matz, Miles Michaelis, etc. Where are you at as far as where we are looking, and do you think we are going to, specifically talking about Arenado right now, do you think that is something, if we get the perfect deal with a team like the Dodgers, obviously on Instagram, he's making that pretty known that, and obviously a California kid, would, be an ideal thing. And coming into St. Louis, obviously big expectations to win and do that. And obviously that hasn't lived up to the expectations. Do you see them making that deal this week?
From all indications around the league and from a couple sources that I've talked to, they believe that an Arenado deal is likely to occur this offseason. Now, we have to understand a couple things about the situation. Not only does he have the no-trade clause, so he can kind of dictate where he wants to go, but also the money that's attached to his name.
Yeah, he has like $74 million left on his contract, right?
Over the next 3 years, $74 million. Now, Colorado is still paying a portion of the next 2 seasons. That third year, that $15 million option that was added on whenever he waived his no-trade clause to come from Colorado to St. Louis, is just a flat $15 million that whoever is, responsible for his contract is paying that. Colorado has nothing to do with that. But over the next 2 seasons, Colorado is still paying $10 million-ish total on that. And then the other thing to consider with Arenado is that we have seen in recent seasons a little bit of decline in his performance. And, obviously with the amount of money that's still owed to him, that will make certain teams hesitant to part with anything exciting, really, for Cardinals fans. So, like, the hope of getting, any major prospects back in return, probably not very realistic. What you're looking to achieve throughout this offseason, and it's kind of been the stated goal at the beginning of the offseason, is to give more young players more opportunities. And Arenado, while he hasn't gone to the Cardinals specifically and said, I want out, you need to trade me right now, get me, like it was in Colorado, like pounding the table saying, I'm done here, get me out. He's more...
There's an open willingness to explore the idea of a trade.
I would call it a mutual decision on both parties. Hey, we're going in a different direction. Would you be open to this? Yes. If you can get me to a contender, I'll go somewhere else and try to win a ring. But if you don't find the right deal, I'm fine with staying here and playing. It's a mutually beneficial situation. So if Arenado, the last thing that I just saw this morning was that he's given the Cardinals, a brief list of teams that he would be interested in. We know from Katie Woo's reporting that he's interested in going to a contender that will be contending over the next 3+ seasons while he's still under contract. It's obvious that his main motivation is to win and to win a ring. And so you look at the teams that are strongest position to do that over the next 3 to 5 seasons, that's likely to be a really good guiding light on what teams might potentially fit for what or where he might end up going.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned you don't know what kind of prospect haul you're going to get from a 33-year-old baseman who had 272 last year. And obviously the name and the Gold Gloves and all that speak for itself,
yeah.
But it's really what kind of value do you have left in that player?
Right.
So.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I believe he had like a 103 WRC plus. So for anyone who isn't aware of what that is, weighted runs created plus is a kind of way to, in the same vein as WAR, you try to evaluate what that player does and then minimizing like ballpark factors. So we know that Busch Stadium is traditionally a very friendly a very friendly ballpark to pitchers. And so it kind of eliminates those ballpark factors and says the raw data suggests that this player is, this good. And 100 is considered league average just as a baseline. And so he was roughly about 3% above average last season, whereas at his peak in Colorado, he was about 40% above league average. And so he's clearly taken, significant steps back. His power numbers have all taken steps back. When you look at savant data on MLB.com, he does a really good job of making good quality contact, but he no longer has, or at least in the sense of 2024, he no longer has the significant raw power that he once did, and also brought to St. Louis's first 2 seasons. And so he's kind of transforming from a power header, middle of the order bat to kind of just a league average power, but a more contact oriented player, because he also doesn't strike out very much. He has like a 14.5% strikeout rate, which is well below what league averages are, right around 20 to 25%. So he makes good contact with the ball on a consistent basis. He just doesn't have a whole lot of power anymore. And so if I know that we talked about WRC plus just a little bit ago, but when you look at other teams that might potentially acquire him, like a Philadelphia, like a Houston, like a New York, the Yankees specifically, those ballparks tend to favor hitters more. And so you could kind of see where even if the ballpark factors don't weigh in as much, some of the outcomes could, positively break in his direction as well. So perhaps a change of scenery would do him some good.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And, I think as far as his market goes, I think that's really going to be dictated with what happens with Juan Soto. I think obviously that, big news around with Juan Soto looking around almost $800 million, and he's kind of be that springboard into the offseason. So once that domino falls, I think then you're going to see some of the teams looking at Arenado and obviously the other free agent third baseman around, like Alec Boehm and some of those guys too. So
yeah, so with Juan Soto specifically, and in the context of the winter meetings, the winter meetings technically starting tomorrow with the unveiling of the what was it? The ballot, the era ballot from previous
Hall of Fame, committee ballot.
Yeah, it's a committee from like players who had already fallen off the list, but they're kind of taking a second look at to see if
it's not like the golden era, but it's
it's like
the
modern day era ballot or something like that, and it's not like what Ichiro is going to be a part of coming up in January when that gets announced. This is separate from that, and basically that's kind of the kickoff to the winter meetings, is like that era ballot announcement. But for fans who like myself, and I'm sure you and others who are watching this, the idea of a winter meetings being, exciting and, full of action and movement and things. And if you remember back to kind of your earlier childhood, whenever the winter meetings happened and you'd get 5, 6, 7, 8 deals in a day, and it was just constant movement and kind of chaos, honestly. That's kind of what you'd be hoping for. And if Juan Soto, if that whole saga, drags into winter meetings, you're not going to get that, because whenever you look at the 5-ish finalists that are in on Soto right now, those 4 teams that miss out on that are going to pivot immediately to other things, and that's going to create movement in the market. And if Soto doesn't sign before, so like what fans should be hoping for is that he signs tonight, because not necessarily sign, but agrees to sign tonight. So if he makes that decision tonight, then you're going to see throughout the course of the winter meetings action, chaos, pivoting from teams going from I'm all in on Juan Soto to now I got to get 2 or 3 different pieces.
I see what you're saying too.
So,
you don't want to stalemate.
Yes.
You don't want a roadblock that's going to interfere with all the excitement and stuff that comes with the winter meetings, like you mentioned.
And I believe that Major League Baseball, this is speculation on my part, but I believe there probably is a little bit of pressure on them, on Juan Soto's camp, Scott Boras specifically, make a decision soon, because we want the winter meetings to be exciting, because it is a good tent pole opportunity to kind of steal some headlines back from the other major sports that are in the middle of their seasons right now.
Right.
And so when you think about like in July, whenever the NHL free agency period starts, or the NBA free agency starts, or in April, whenever the NFL draft happens, or just what have you.
There's a lot. I feel like there's a lot more buzz and coverage as far as marketability goes with those sports, as far as MLB goes.
Exactly.
So,
And so they steal headlines back from Major League Baseball in the middle of their season. So the idea remains the same. In the winter meetings in the middle of December, whenever, nobody's really thinking about baseball. Oh, wow, Juan Soto just signed for $700 and something million. And you're like, hey, that grabs attention, that grabs buzz. And then all of these other moves start happening. And wow, we got to all, pay attention to what's going on in baseball right now because it's super exciting, and so that's kind of, for me, and that always kind of gets my engine going a little bit whenever moves start happening and deals start getting signed, and it's like, wow, you can really see it unfold, and you can kind of see how front offices start to put those puzzle pieces together and make that picture become whole. So it's really fascinating to me,
and it's just great stuff to debate about and speculate and
for
stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, as I mentioned, unfortunately the Cardinals are probably not going to make a whole lot of moves at the meetings as far as transactions go. So, basically Nolan Arenado looking like he's going to go, unfortunately, and that he's really the last pillar, I guess you could say, as far as your franchise players on the team go. I mean, you still have Wilson Contreras and Sonny Gray and some of those guys,
and they would take Sonny Gray and Wilson Contreras specifically would kind of take over that foundational leader role over the next couple seasons. But you also are kind of hoping that Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman kind of establish themselves as kind
Mason
of those
Wynn.
Yes, exactly. So these younger guys, and that's kind of the whole point of 2025, or at least the stated goal is for those guys to kind of assume and establish themselves as that core, and then 2026 and beyond, the team can start to build around that new formed nucleus and try to once again re-push their chips back into the middle. But for right now, they're essentially, the way they feel is, if you're a poker player, they've been handed 7 deuce offsuit and their hand wasn't going to work going forward, and so they just kind of folded and said, this isn't going to work for me. I'm going to wait for a more beneficial opportunity to try to cash in on this opportunity. So
right, yeah, and I think we're looking to probably cash in on Ryan Helsley. I know Katie Wu has reported that Mozeliak has stated that they're not ruling anything out necessarily, but obviously, if anything sparks their interest, they'll definitely be looking to maybe move Ryan Helsley, who was all MLB team, saves leader last year, and a credit to the great bullpen that the Cardinals had last year. Do you think Ryan Helsley gets dealt, or do you think some of the other pitchers like Steven Matz or Miles Michaelis or anyone else on the pitching staff, do you think those guys will be dealt at the meetings?
So I'll try to address as many players as I possibly can for you.
Yeah, sure. I know there's a lot to talk about.
Steven Matz specifically, I do think that he has enough value that he'll get moved. I do think that when you look at Matt Boyd, who just signed with the Chicago Cubs, 2 years, $29 million, and then Frankie Montas and Luis Severino each signed 3-year deals.
And I think Clay Holmes
just signed
last
with
night.
with New York at a 3-year deal. And their AAVs are significantly higher than what Steven Matz is, but Matt Boyd specifically is the one I look at and say that any acquiring team could get Matt Boyd level production for $3 to $4 million less, and we clearly see now that the Cubs were willing to go 2 years, $29 million on that entity. So, and when you look at Matt Boyd and his injury history, and you compare it to what Steven Matz has done over the last 2 to 3 years, there's value in Steven Matz. Now, you're like, again, with Arenado, you're not going to get a ton in return, right? But the idea that you can move that player out and then move
He's
in.
a versatile enough player because he has started and he has also came out of the bullpen as well.
And
so that's some of that marketability there.
That factors into some of his value and the fact that he is versatile and can do different things for rotation. I look at a team like the Dodgers, and you think about the way the Dodgers approach pitching, and they look at it more in an aggregate sense rather than really specifically defined roles. If you can get 100 to 110 innings out of a Steven Matz for $11 million, and those are high quality innings, it's very valuable.
I think you take that every day.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, for a team like the Dodgers, where money really isn't an object, and you can get like a low A reliever who has a couple different pitches that are kind of the shapes to their pitch. So that's the way that baseball is starting to transition now. It's not always just about velocity, but it's also about like the way that the pitcher throws the ball from whatever type of arm angle he throws it at, or the way that the ball manipulates kind of the gravity around it and the way it makes it
the RPMs
move.
on it.
Yes, everything that's involved, the shape of the pitch and the way that it moves. If you can find a couple different traits in a low A reliever that has some of that interest to him that could potentially be a part of this, future team in 2 or 3 years, that's kind of the idea of what you're looking for. You're not looking for like a top 5 prospect in that team's organization, because nobody's going to give you that for Steven Matz. But if you can go, digging for that diamond in the rough that has some interesting little traits to him, that's a perfectly adequate return. You get that $11 million off your books for this upcoming season. And then that allows guys like a Simra Bursa or a Tink Hence or a Quinn Matthews to have an opportunity to get some of those innings at the major league level this season. So it kind of it's twofold. It gets the money off the books, which we know recently isn't necessarily a main motivator anymore because of the TV deal that came through and the money that walked out the door. They're pretty cash neutral at this point, is what they've said. They've cleared enough money that that's no longer a driving force. Now, if they're moving a player, it's value oriented. And so the value is getting those young players opportunities and, giving Matz an opportunity to go win somewhere else would be, ideal for the player. Who is the next player? You mentioned Ryan Helsley. Let's talk about him. You mentioned what was written in Ken Rosenthal and Katie Wu's piece, talking about how Mo is open-minded to anything, but at this current juncture, he expects, the player to be on the team. I would caution any fan from overreacting to those statements, only because this is the season whenever all 30 teams are trying to position themselves for leverage, right? It's all leverage plays, and it's 30 of them all at once trying to gain and maintain leverage on one another. And so you're going to say things like, yeah, we're not particularly, motivated to move him at this current point. And so, you hear that, and it kind of like, 6 or 7 different teams who have kind of might have inquired on Ryan Helsley would be like, oh crap, we got to, up our interest a little bit to maybe get us over that hump, because, and so that's kind of the motivating idea behind it. I know fans get frustrated with it because it kind of sounds like Mo's talking out of both sides of his mouth, and he doesn't really, have enough self-awareness to understand what's going on. That's not the case. It has fully been proven that front office types will negotiate through the media. So they'll put things out for the specific reason of gaining leverage, amongst their peers. And so that's something that needs to be, that needs to be understood further, I think, from our fan base, is that it's not always a situation where what he's saying, you should just immediately take it at face value. We're not trading Ryan Helsley. We're open-minded to it, but we're not going to do it. The way I've read it, because of the stated goal at the offseason, he's simply stating that we're not going to give him away for nothing, right? If you want to come up to where we are and you want to match our price tag, we'll trade him. We'll do it. But if you think we're going to give you 70 cents on the dollar for Ryan Helsley, we're not going to do it. We'll carry that player into season, and then we'll readdress it maybe at the deadline and see where that goes.
Yeah, it needs to make sense for both parties.
Yes.
And it needs to benefit both parties.
Just because the Cardinals are going in this direction does not mean they necessarily have to just give away players for free. That's not the case. They need to still be attempting to get value back in return for these players. And if they're not doing that, then they're not doing their job correctly.
Exactly.
So
I think we should keep Ryan Helsley. I mean, he's, obviously we have other guys that can, step up and be in that closing role. I mean, you look at a Rule 5 pick last year, Ryan Fernandez, he's certainly is capable of doing that. I know Jojo Romero has done that. So some of those guys, but yeah, just, we need to, stay competitive in 2025, but also, look to the future. So
yeah, I would kind of push back and go the opposite direction. I think the most ideal situation would be you trade Ryan Helsley this offseason, because as we know, that relievers are volatile and they can blow up, and they also experience the most
backlash,
the most risk for becoming for injury because of how hard they throw and the immense torque and strain they put on their bodies for how hard they throw. They're the highest risk for injury. And so when you think about it, Ryan Helsley right now, after just being named reliever of the year, he's at peak value right now. You have one of the 2 or 3 best relievers in all of Major League Baseball in Ryan Helsley, and you would want to cash in on that entity rather than having to take him into the season in 2025. I know some fans are like, why not just carry him, to the trade deadline and you could potentially get more for him then? Well, what happens if he gets hurt? That diminishes value. What happens if his stuff takes a step back in season? That diminishes his value. What happens if, he no longer can perform in that closer's role, or he, loses some of that confidence and, he starts having statistical issues with some of what he had done in the past, loses value, right? You can only stand to lose value from this point. And so maximizing and cashing in on the entity now makes the most sense. Also, if 2025 is truly to be a year of evaluation, what is there to be gained from evaluating what Ryan Helsley is? We already know what he is.
This is true, yeah.
Right? And so when you think about it that way, and if your ultimate goal, your number one goal isn't to contend for a World Series this season, what's the point of having a closer on your team? A specialized role that he does almost better than anyone else, that a contending team and closers are notoriously known as for contenders to be that final piece, right? You're that just right there. We need that closer to kind of help put us over the top. And so why he's more valuable now as opposed to when you could get a team who's more desperate at the deadline, but you wouldn't, he wouldn't necessarily, I would be shocked if he maintained as much value going into the deadline this coming season as he does have right now, because you get a full season of Ryan Helsley. At the deadline, you're getting 2 months plus, a postseason run of Ryan Helsley. And then he becomes a free agent. The Cardinals aren't going to re-sign Ryan Helsley. It's not going to happen. The Cardinals traditionally are a very risk-averse team that does not like taking on significant money for players who are potentially injury-prone. And Ryan Helsley has dealt with injuries in the past. Not only that, but he's also going to be on the wrong side of 30 for a player who's attached to one of his main value points is how hard he throws. He throws 100 miles an hour. And we know as players age, they don't tend to add velocity, they lose velocity.
Right.
And as you lose velocity, you lose effectiveness. And so as he starts to, exit his prime and starts to decline a little bit, now is the correct time to cash in on him. The Cardinals aren't going to give $20 million plus a year to Ryan Helsley for the next 4 to 5 years, because that's what he's going to cost. You're talking about Edwin Diaz. You're talking about Josh Hader. You're talking about Aroldis Chapman, Kenley Jansen. Well, Clase signed a 4-year, $36 million extension. Yeah. Like, he took a team-friendly deal because he also was dealing with injuries at the time that he signed it, but he had shown enough that the Indians were willing to kind of give him that below-market deal to keep him around. And so, but the point is, Ryan Helsley is going to, when he walks into the offseason of 2025, he's going to get paid like one of the top closers because he is one of the top closers. And the Cardinals traditionally have never done that. And we also know that Chaim Bloom has never done that or does that type of thing either. And so knowing that 2025 is the end and you're not going to contend in 2025, what point is there to carry that asset into the season? You're only standing to lose value in that situation unless you get lucky. He manages to maintain what he did last season, stays healthy doing it, and then you cash in at the deadline. So many things have to go right for you to be able to cash in on him at the deadline. It behooves the Cardinals the most to move him in the offseason now and, shed yourself some of that risk. So
yeah, no, I think you make great points there, and obviously we're talking about all the guys that the Cardinals are looking to move, but we haven't really dived into some of the additions that they can make to help bolster the current roster that they make, or the current roster that they have. I know right now they're looking at maybe trying to add some power in the outfield as far as that goes.
I mean, it's kind of everyone's discretion what they think. I mean, the Cardinals haven't outwardly said that they're looking to, add much of anything this offseason. A lot of what they expect is to be internal players to kind of step up and step into those roles so they can kind of evaluate what they have. Now, I've kind of speculated through some of my writing that, perhaps they could take a chance on a buy low guy and kind of throw him into that mix. And maybe if he overperforms his expected production, you could maybe potentially flip him at the deadline to kind of, add to that player accrual process, because right now what the Cardinals are looking to also do is accrue assets and bring them in to build that next core, right? And so the idea would be to buy low on somebody, bring them in, hope that they overperform, and then you trade them away and get the assets for that.
Sure, yeah. I just know that last year specifically in the outfield, they did not get the production that they wanted, obviously, because you had guys like Nootbaar who were injured, Michael Ciani, Jordan Walker had his own struggles as well. So that's kind of where I was thinking that they could maybe make some additions there to kind of bolster that up a bit.
I wouldn't necessarily close,
I'm not closing the door
I wouldn't close the
any
door
of those guys by any means.
But I have
those are probably your three starting outfielders.
I have every
today.
expectation that it's going to be Nootbaar, either Ciani or Scott in center, and then Walker in right, and that's going to be your outfield going into the season. Now, I had mentioned like an Austin Hayes, who just recently got non-tendered by the Phillies. That's a really interesting platoon bat that could kind of work. He could play all three outfield positions, primarily corner outfield, but you can play him in center field the same way that you could play Lars Nootbaar in center in a pinch and not necessarily worry about it for a few games. But the fact that he had a 941 OPS against left-handed pitching really offers a nice balance to a Lars Nootbaar, who isn't overly splitty, but you want to build in some of that protection against getting him overly exposed. And then we saw that Victor Scott and Michael Ciani are both works in progress in terms of the bat. Ciani doesn't necessarily have the highest ceiling when it comes to offensive potential, but he does so many things well.
I was going to say, he led the team in stolen bases last year.
Stolen bases. He was a 99th percentile defender in center field. He is an elite center fielder defensively, and then he's a really good bunter. But the fact that the problem was he got overly exposed this year because the rest of the offense was not good. Michael Ciani is the ideal prototypical ninth place hitter, where you're hoping that the other 7 or 8 hitters in your lineup really provide the thump for you, and then he provides that additional defensive, ability. And some fans would say, well, just make him a 4th outfielder and then, try to get more offensive production. And you can do that, but there are certain times early in the game where he might be able to steal a run back for you that could ultimately end up winning you the game later on down the road. And so it's kind of like
it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, exactly. You could have it either way. It makes sense, but the point is that he does provide value, even if it's not necessarily all attributed to offensive potential. Whereas Victor Scott, what we're seeing, and he's still growing and still learning and maturing, is that he does have a higher offensive upside potential, and that he does have. The thing is that his defense isn't nearly what Ciani's is. The potential is that he could be what Ciani is. He won a minor league Gold Glove, but he's not there yet. And so for Victor Scott, it's continued growth. And the question really is, does that growth benefit him most starting out the season at AAA, or does it benefit him the most doing it at the major league level to start the season, give him the full season to really, get his feet underneath him entirely? Those are questions that the Cardinals are going through right now and have been continued to explore. They probably have a plan in place. We're not totally privy to that. They're saying that Michael Ciani might start the season as a starting center fielder. They're saying Victor. They're not sure. They're gonna. My expectation has always been that they would let them battle it out in spring training. If they don't do what they did, like they did with Richie Palacios, and and selling high on what they got from Michael Ciani, if they truly believe that he hit his peak value this season and isn't going to get any better, that might be an ideal opportunity, because you have some depth behind him to kind of get something else that you might need a year or two down the road, rather than kind of blocking one of your higher upside potential prospects.
Sure, and I think you can go out and get some of these buy low guys on the offense, on the pitching staff as well. But I think really what the goal is if this is truly a reset kind of, evaluation year like we keep talking about, you want to give some of your current assets some of those opportunities. And I think a guy in particular that could, really flourish is Thomas Sagasi on the infield. The question is, where are you going to play him,
Yeah, so JC's really interesting. I mean, he's a right-handed complement whenever you talk about guys like Nolan Gorman and Brendan Donovan, and those are the kind of guys that he's going to be, directly competing with for at-bats and playing time. But I have every expectation that he'll be on the team throughout the entirety of the season. He will get opportunities to play on a consistent basis and kind of show what he's got. Kind of an underrated aspect to his game is that he can also play a little bit of shortstop. So if there's a day where Mason Wynn needs a day off, Thomas Sagasi can step in and play that shortstop. He's a little bit of a right-handed Alec Burleson, so his offensive profile fits that way. He swings a ton. He likes to swing the bat. He's not, he doesn't draw a lot of walks, not super patient. But the fact is, if he swings at it, he can almost always get to the pitch. He doesn't swing and miss a lot, but there is also the potential for 15 to 20 home run power there as well. And so the offensive production that might come from him would remind fans a little bit of what we kind of saw from Alec Burleson. It does rely a little bit on batted ball luck, so BABIP, batted balls in play average. If that's higher, then balls are falling, and he benefits a little bit more from being a little luckier, right? As opposed to players who have kind of the power patience profile that either hit a lot of home runs or take a ton of walks, kind of like Juan Soto, for instance. Like, there's a ton of value in that because he either hits the ball really hard or he takes a walk. And there's really not much in between. He's not the easy out. And so Thomas Sagasi doesn't walk a ton. That's not his game. Maybe Alec Burleson, same thing. But could they enhance that and change their approach slightly to get to a little bit, maybe change and add 1% to 2% more on their walk rate? They could, but it's not exactly their profile. It's not who they are. It's not how they approach the game. So
sure, yeah. I think also if you look at the first base side of things, now that Paul Goldschmidt is no longer expected to be on the team, they have stated that Wilson Contreras, they do plan on seeing him at first base to kind of help with some of his longevity at his career. And I think you do have a few guys that can help back up him as well and get a look at first base. Obviously, we've talked about Alec Burleson. He's played a little bit there. I think he probably, in my opinion, would be better out there. Obviously, he can play the outfield, but he's kind of a bigger guy and obviously a corner outfielder and probably not going to get a whole lot of reps out there. But another guy as well, Lucan Baker. This is a guy who has absolutely raked it in the minor leagues.
Yeah. Unfortunately for Lucan Baker, he doesn't have the defensive acumen to be a starting caliber first baseman. He's kind of a part-time first base / DH profile. That's kind of what you would expect for him to be. I do. So a lot of fans here, Wilson Contreras is moving to first base. I don't think he's going to play there a ton. I think he's going to primarily DH, but his primary position when he does play the field will be first base. That's the way I've been reading the situation. I do expect Alec Burleson to get the lion's share of starts at first base defensively. But, in starts, we saw this season, when you look at the numbers, Alec Burleson is very platoon splitty. So he's very good against right-handed pitching, but he struggles a lot against left-handed pitching. Now, I get the devil's advocate aspect to this, where if you're using 2025 as a season to, evaluate what you have, wouldn't you just rather have Alec Burleson face every left-hander so for sure? We got a pretty decent 200-plus at-bat sample size this season of him against left-handed pitching. It wasn't very good. And so you might look at that as a situation where Wilson Contreras is going to DH primarily, but against tough left-handed pitchers that wouldn't profile as good matchups for Alec Burleson, that's when he'll start at first base. And then maybe if you want to load up on the righties, Ivan Herrera will DH, and then you start Pedro Pajes, and you kind of put that all right-handed group into the lineup, and you take all the left. You know what I'm saying? So
right.
There's a lot of flexibility being built into this roster for 2025, and so Ollie Marmol is going to have the opportunity to kind of mix and match and do things how he sees fit, because it will put his players in the best situation to succeed.
Right. Yeah, and I think ideally what you want is those guys to really flourish and step in and really be the future of this team, and hopefully they do a great job doing that and get those opportunities to do so. As far as making any other additions go, I know we've obviously mentioned a lot about the versatility of some of these guys in the infield, and they're probably going to do a whole lot from within. So I don't necessarily anticipate us making a whole lot of position player moves. I think pitching needs to be a key emphasis that we need to address.
So the one thing I will say is like maybe Matt Carpenter's spot on the roster might, be somewhere where you might see like a veteran utility infielder. We've seen the Cardinals, a couple of guys that they signed to minor league deals this year, like a Jose Barrero or a Ryan Vilade, who they just added a couple of days ago. I also looked at a John Birdie, who was with Miami a couple seasons ago, and then he was with New York. He's a right-handed hitter. He's got a ton of speed. Is very versatile, can play literally every position on the field aside from like catcher and first base. So like very valuable bench piece that would make a lot of sense for the Cardinals. In 2023, whenever he had the most exposure to playing the field on a consistent basis, he had an 805 OPS against left-handed pitching in 2023. And so like, again, that kind of factors into maybe you take a lefty out and he kind of gets that opportunity to play. That's a name that I'm kind of intrigued by. John Birdie, Austin Hayes. Those are a couple names that have some interest to me. And then
I know recently we had a minor league sign, Ryan Vilade.
Yeah,
I think his name is.
Yeah, that's who I mentioned.
He's kind of like that John Birdie, like you mentioned as well. Other than first base or catcher, he gives you a lot of positional versatility. He's young. He's 25. So
has some ex-top prospect pedigree to him. He was, very highly thought of recently, but has kind of diminished his shine. And I would look at him as kind of depth. The thing with Birdie is you might pay him $1 million or $2 million to just play on the bench, and that's kind of his role, and that's what he does best. So that's the idea for that. With Vilade and Barrero, you're kind of hoping to catch lightning in a bottle, and maybe they do something more. But if not, they're perfectly adequate AAA players.
Exactly, yeah.
To your point on the pitching side, I think a lot of their interest is, once again, finding out what they have at the AAA Major League level, guys they already have internally. But I think that would change slightly if they traded Ryan Helsley, because they also lost Andrew Kittredge at the back end of games. I think the most likely, and it's not even entirely that likely, where they would add a veteran somewhere would be in the bullpen as kind of like that bullpen mentor for some of the younger guys who are out there. Not necessarily because Andrew Kittredge, I expect to get $10 million plus this season, maybe a 1 or 2 year deal for $10+ million. I don't think he's going to come back. But someone like that, someone who's 35, 36 years old, has a strong track record, could probably pitch some high leverage innings for you. I don't have any names off the top of my head that would make a ton of sense for it, but something of that vein, kind of a veteran mentor for those guys out there in the bullpen. And then, those young guys you kind of see after 2025 who's stuck in their position, and you kind of move forward from there, addressing that situation. But as far as the rotation goes, they're actively looking to move guys out to give more guys opportunities. I don't think they're going to be adding any veterans there. The bullpen, maybe a veteran leader at some point. That would probably be just before spring training, but nothing, that would be earth-shattering or exciting to fans.
Sure, yeah. I think a couple of those guys, young guys that can make a big impact, the pitching side, particularly, I think they're going to start in the bullpen, maybe even get a chance at that fifth starting role. A couple of recent 40-man roster additions, Tink Hence and Quinn Matthews.
So with Quinn Matthews specifically, he jumped 4 levels last season, and he I had kind of put out some feelers on whether or not he would start next season at the Major League level. More likely than not, he'll start again at AAA, and you might see him by June or July. He's probably a mid-season call-up guy. With Tink Hence, as a different situation, he spent all of last season at AA, and he's still trying to figure out how to recover from start to start. So like one start, he'll have, a tremendous outing and he'll strike out 11, 12 batters over 5 innings and the stuff plays and it's really exciting. And then the next start, he might strike out 3 batters and only last 4 innings. And just trying to put together that consistency and recovering from start to start and taking it to that next level is what the Cardinals are wanting to see. And so I don't know if he starts the season at AA or AAA, but I don't think we'll see Tink Hence until maybe September. I would expect he's likely maybe a potential September call-up and then maybe 5 to 10 innings out of the bullpen just to see what it looks like at the major league level. I think that his timeline and his trajectory probably profiles more to 2026.
Sure, yeah. Just briefly keeping on a little bit of the prospect side goes, is there any other notable prospects that you can see make an impact in 2025 for the Cardinals? 2025, 2026.
Technically, it's Thomas Saggese is still considered a prospect, so like that would be the most immediate one. Going through the list in my head, yeah, Quinn Matthews is maybe a midseason guy.
I know a outfielder, Chase Davis.
He ended the season at AA. I expect him to probably finish the season at AAA next year if everything goes well. He's probably more on a 2026 timeline as well. There's not a ton of guys. I mean, Andre Granillo is a relief prospect. I expect he might at some point get added to the 40-man in season and then, given an opportunity to pitch in some games and kind of see what that looks like. I would let me look at the list because there's probably somebody that I'm overlooking, and so let me just do this real quick.
I know, just spitballing. I know we just drafted him last year, but JJ Weatherholt could certainly maybe.
I think he also falls into that 2026, 2027 category. He's gonna rise fast, and Cardinals fans should absolutely be ecstatic about what he's gonna bring to the table, but I would not say he's in line for if he gets to the majors this coming season, it's incredible. Absolutely incredible and
beyond expectations.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I would not go into the season expecting that, but make no mistake, he will be a part of your core in the future going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we talked about JJ Weatherholt. He's probably more of a 2026 timeline. Tink Hence, September is kind of what I would be looking at for him. Quinn Matthews, maybe June or July. JC's going to be there the full season. Jimmy Crooks, because of the presence of Herrera and Pajes, I don't necessarily. There's
He's kind of blocked there.
If there's an injury, he might be somebody you could see. TK Roby, if he avoids injury, maybe he's kind of in that Quinn Matthews vein where you might see him midseason. Chase Davis is more 2026. Cooper Jerpy is somebody who you might keep an eye on, who might, September might get some. Michael McGreevy is still, at that is considered the 10th ranked prospect, and he's going to start.
Okay.
I
forgot about it.
I have every expectation that Michael McGreevy starts the season in the rotation and pitches the full season in the rotation. Graceffo, I believe, will get some opportunities. Simmer Bursa, I think, will get some opportunities. Depending on how he starts the season and maybe an injury pops up, I think you could potentially see a Cesar Prieto, who's got a very similar profile to Thomas Saggese and Alec Burleson. Hit first, contact, high swing characteristics, does a lot of that. Let's see here. No. Max Radjic might be somebody who might get a look at some point.
I know we added Matt Svanson.
Matt Svanson. That's another good one. That's someone I did forget about. Yeah, so Svanson being on the 40-man does immediately jump to that. And he had a really strong fall league performance, and he also performed well this past season in the upper minors. And so he's somebody who you could probably look to in the aggregate to also get a few innings. I think that, like you talk about, Svanson and Granillo and a couple of these other young guys, they're going to shuttle back and kind of ride that Memphis shuttle, quote unquote. And they'll just cycle through some guys, get them some opportunities, kind of see what they're dealing with. And then from there, they'll kind of piece together what they think 2026 could look like.
Yeah. So I think that's all great. We discussed a little bit about what the offseason plans are a little bit, and probably going to deal more than acquire, but what we have, I think, is pretty good foundation. So.
Yeah, and that's the hope, right? Is that what you have now establishes itself and becomes that foundation, because that will move up your timeline. Now, if the worst case scenario happens again and Nolan Gorman remains roughly 40% strikeout rate and is basically unplayable, if Jordan Walker fails to take that step forward and establish himself, if Mason Wynn regresses, if Brendan Donovan and Lars Nootbaar and Victor Scott and Alec Burleson don't do the things that we're hoping that they do, Ivan Herrera, I put in that category as well. If these guys all don't kind of, make their mark and establish themselves somehow, then this timeline gets longer to getting back to contention. The hope is that these guys take that step forward, establish themselves, and you can kind of, count on that young core that you can then look to the free agent market in 2026, or maybe the trade market. I'm not sure what direction they would go, but you might look to add one or two pieces going into 2026 that fit into that timeline and that will boost that team going into 2026. But for 2025, it's going to be a different season than most Cardinal fans are used to. And I'm going to talk to Cardinals fans specifically. It's okay that we take one season in 2025 and it not be exactly what we're used to, because at the end of the day, Chaim Bloom, who's in charge now, when you look at the Boston Red Sox and what they've got coming up, and they have 3 of the top 10 in all of Major League Baseball, their prospects.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so what Chaim Bloom is going to do, and what this new integrated group of coordinators and directors and these guys who have high IQ, and what they're going to do, trying to build this pitching lab down in Jupiter, Florida, and doing all of these things, it's going to be a process. It's going to take a little bit of time, but you're going to see the fruits of that labor. And I know that fans are so tired of hearing John Mozeliak say, just be patient, just be patient. I think we can afford giving Chaim Bloom a little bit of that patience that John Mozeliak asked for, because it will come to fruition if you allow Chaim Bloom to give that Chaim Bloom effect and sprinkle his magic across the minor leagues. You're going to get what you're hoping for. It's going to be the young, factory of the factory of producing young players and players who overperform their expected numbers and their expected performances and do these things that you're starting to see in places like a Cleveland, where they got Rob Cerfolio and Larry Day, like they do in Seattle, like they added with a Matt Pierpont, like they do, in Tampa Bay, with the way that Chaim Bloom influenced for years in the Rays system. You're going to start to see all of that happen here in St. Louis. And that's not the Cardinals being cheap. That's the Cardinals being smart. That's being smart. How often did we look at Lance Lynn, Kyle Gibson, and all of these other Band-Aid type players that have kind of masked over? It's putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. We know that the problem is deeper than what they're trying to mask, but they're trying to compete because that's the expectation in St. Louis. Well, finally, the Cardinals have kind of made that decision to take that step back and say, no more Band-Aids. We're going to actually go in, take the bullet out, and suture the hole back up. So that's the way that I would implore Cardinals fans to kind of view 2025.
Exactly. And, obviously we have every reason to be cautious because we're in navigated waters.
Yes.
We haven't really had to experience, I know you and myself, young guys, we really haven't had to experience this type of, thing in St. Louis as far as baseball and the success goes. But I think what they have in place, the plan that Mozeliak and the DeWitts have in place, adding Chaim Bloom in to rebuild the Cardinal way, honestly, I think that is a great stepping stone, and it's going to be a very interesting time, but I think is going to be worth the wait. So
it's a new day, and it's going to be a new Cardinal way.
Exactly.
So that's the way I would champion it to Cardinals fans, is like it's going to be something new. These guys, another part of Chaim Bloom and kind of his philosophy and Rob Cerfolio and the way they do things, they do implement some of like the old way of doing things, hit and run. A lot of those quintessential Cardinals aspects that Cardinals fans love in blue collar type baseball. They also enjoy those types of things, and they do try to implement those things. But there's also a new understanding of the way that analytics can be implemented and getting more out of those players. And so be patient, but an exciting new frontier is coming.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Well, Jake, I very much appreciate you coming on the show. I think you gave us a lot of great information, and certainly, I learned a lot from listening to you, and I appreciate you coming on the show here and giving Cardinals fans the answers that they have been craving. So.
Yeah, man, anytime. I'm happy to jump back on and talk Cardinals baseball, and obviously you can go to Viva El Birdos and vivaelbirdos.com and read any of my work. You can go to I'm on Spotify, Amazon Music, Castbox, and Pocket Cast. You can find the Viva El Birdos podcast. And this coming Monday, I don't know whenever this is going to get posted or whatever, but you can go and listen to the interview that we just did with Josh Jacobs of Fansided, and he does the Deal on the Cards podcast, and they do a tremendous job over there. And so we got a lot of really exciting guests coming on in the near future, and honestly, I have a giant list of names that I hope to get to at some point throughout the year that as I've thankfully gotten to elevate to at this point, being with Viva El Birdos, that they are more inclined now to come on and kind of do the show. So very excited for what's to come, and I hope that WLCA listeners as well as just general Cardinal fans will be excited to follow along, because it's been a really cool, fun journey going from a virtual no name to now, being a paid position to write and talk about the Cardinals. And, as the days go by, just, further immersing myself into the culture of the community and doing more and getting more of that exposure.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm certainly excited as well. And you guys should be too. He beat me to it. Go check it out. All great stuff there. And that is going to wrap things up here for the Pulse on the Redbirds. So tune in next time. There will be plenty more offseason speculation, I'm sure. Hopefully the Cardinals at that point will have some big deals. Probably not, but big deals to maybe talk about. And obviously we're going to provide our opinions on that as well.
There's always something to talk about.
I know. Yeah. So anyways, thank you guys for watching. And I will see you guys next time.